Okay, well, here we are. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Bobby Hughes, and I'm the host of the Pennsylvania Abandoned Mine Reclamation Chronicles, our podcast here, along with my co host, Ann Damon from the Western Pennsylvania Coalition for Abandoned Mine Reclamation. And we want to welcome you and our special guest here, Don Kane Jr. from the Huber Breaker Preservation Society, who's their current president, to this podcast, which is a one of a kind podcast series that is conversing with passionate community minded partners and kind of highlighted outstanding reclamation and community cleanup efforts and people that are working on abandoned mine reclamation projects, stream restoration efforts, and they're sharing ideas and technologies to both reclaim and remediate our legacy abandoned mine projects and lands that have been impacted by previous coal mining impacts. And we're also looking at restoring and preserving the history and culture of our region here across Pennsylvania. So that's what the podcast series is about. And we want to welcome you to our channel and episode this afternoon, and looking forward to hearing from Dawn.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bobby. And first and foremost, we want to thank the Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds for underwriting our first 12 episodes. The first 5 episodes have already they are archived on both the Camera and Whipcamera YouTube channels. And we're now on our 6th episode, so that's exciting. We're hopeful that this live streaming format of personal interviews and discussing timely topics related to abandoned mine reclamation will engage our audience at a whole new level. So if we have people joining us, please feel free to enter your comments and questions in the chat box of wherever you're joining from, either YouTube or Facebook, and we'll be able to see those. And if you have any questions for Don, I'm sure he'd be happy to chat with you. So thanks, Bobby. Back to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Ann. I'd kind of like to introduce our guest, Don Kane Jr. here, and give you a little bit of background on him first before we get into some questions with him. Don was born in Kittery, Maine, and he says his first experience was in the ocean at 3 months, according to his dad, and was stationed at Portsmouth, I think it's Portsmouth, Naval Base, and says he has birth certificates from 2 states, so we'll hear more about that. That's interesting. He grew up on Hazel Avenue here in the Wilkes-Barre area in Wilkes-Barre, and had a family-owned Pervin Dairy, which was a local dairy in the city, and many family members had worked there. And his dad did probably a lot of maintenance around the dairy. His mom and him worked the ice cream parlor from what he's told us so far. And, he went to St. Nick's and St. Mary's for a few years, and then went to Bishop Hoban, which is now, let's see, it's not Bishop Hoban anymore. It's Holy Redeemer. It's Holy Redeemer, and where he attended in his sophomore year. And then he went on to the Wilkes-Barre area vocational technical school for masonry, and has been working since the age of 13. So he became really interested in mining in grade school and doing mining projects. And his great-grandfather was a miner in the north end of Wilkes-Barre who possibly worked at the Dorrance Colliery. And Teresa's grandfather, Huber, that's your wife, I believe, was crushed by a mine car, and his sons found him, that he had passed away at home. So long history of mining and the legacy that impacts families here in the coal region. But he also had an interest in trains at a pretty young age, and trains were all around us here. He'll talk probably a little bit about the Central Railroad New Jersey yard that's right here on behind the grounds of the Huber Breaker, former Huber Breaker. And, he lowered the gates as a child, and then went on to join the National Guard in 1974, a few years after the flood here in June of 72. and then joined the Air Force in '76. Kind of traveled the world, let's say, during the wartime era in Japan, Korea, and several states for a few years when he was a welder. Um, his wife Teresa is a lifelong resident here of Ashley, and they have three sons, Don the third, Jeff, and Mark. And it worked as a mason until around 2000, and then became the head of maintenance or involved with maintenance down at the Hanover area school district. So over that time, he's maintained an interest in mining and trains, and both real and model scaled versions of trains and tracks, and making coal and other load cars for model trains. And a lot of them are on display, and some of them are even here on display at Epcamer because he's utilized some of our recycled pigment and iron oxide dye in some of the coal cars that and the loads that he's created. So he'll probably show some of those a little bit later on. Um, and just a background on his efforts with the Huber Breaker before he gets into some of the details here with the Preservation Society at his wife's urging. And since he's been so active in railroad history and mining restoration of mine cars here at the breaker, there's a mine car on site. There's the Wannabe number 9 Loki. There's a Central Railroad, Central New Jersey shanty, a Central New Jersey mass signal that's been restored. There's a kiosk that's in production, and there's some other railroad artifacts and mining tools around about a 3-acre parcel just adjacent to our office here in Ashley. He'll probably be talking about the opening of the number 5 slope a little bit later. They're planning some multi-use building construction for some meetings, a museum, and a small kitchen. And they've been discussing some other stuff that I'm sure he'll go into, like a community garden. And he has an idea for a haunted Halloween trail at the park as a fundraiser and community activity. And recently here, they've hosted a mining and railroad collectibles and model train show at St. Leo's Hall, one of the churches here in Ashley that was very successful. And, past fundraisers that they've done included the annual chicken barbecue, a spaghetti dinner. They plan on having that again, shirt and sweatshirt sales and raffle tickets. And, they're always welcoming new members. So Don have kind of picked up where some of our fellow community leaders left off. And we'll be talking a little bit later about Mr. Ray Clark here, who's been instrumental in some of the early history of what's gone on with the Breaker Society. And I'm sure he'll share his thoughts on Don, as will I, about our relationship with that pillar of our community here in Ashley. So, with that, I'll turn it back to Ann, and we'll proceed here.
I mean, wow, that was really a lot to take in just a few minutes there. So we are definitely going to have to pick apart some of that stuff and talk more in detail. But what we like to do first in welcoming our guests is to ask you to dive a little bit deeper into your upbringing, where you're from, your connections to either historical or current coal mining, just so that our audience can get to know you as a person on a personal level better. Bobby already knows you pretty well. I don't know you, so I'd like to get to know you. You sound like a very interesting person, and we're happy to be able to share you with our audience.
Well, there are tons of mines all around the valley. Several of them were surrounding the area where I grew up on Hazel Street. There was mining operations off Blackman Street. There was one on Stanton Street, Cole Street, down just below Grant Street in the Sheridan Street area. So they were everywhere. And it was just a daily way of life. We burned coal at our house. And I can remember standing alongside the chute as the coal was going down, and my brother and I would kind of help the coal along with our hands. Then we'd go in after the coal was delivered and play in the coal pile. And as we got older, we were responsible for maintaining the fire, dampening it off at night, putting water in the little hopper at the bottom for moisture in the air. And so mining and railroading was a daily part of life growing up here in the valley.
Yeah.
That's you're sharing a lot of what many of our past speakers have talked about, and generally they've had some connection directly to the coal communities in which they grew up, and there's a lot of shared experience that are very similar that we hear. That's a sort of thread that runs through many of the folks that we've had on, and there'll be some that don't have that sort of intimate connection with the past industry, but we often joke it aside, say that we've come up through some times in these communities that are very different than others outside of the coal fields, and you can tell, and there's always this passion and pride and sense of belonging that is from people that grew up in these communities, and just like if they were outside the coal region in a more agricultural setting or maybe a bigger city setting, there's some attachment to those places. And it sounds like with the work that you've done and are still doing, that you obviously hold that special attachment to the location here, where it's your home, it's our home in the valley, and we wanted to find out a little bit more about, like, how many years have you been involved in working with the Breaker Society, or how did you kind of weave your way into working with some of the volunteers and historic amateur, preservationists and historians from the area, and pretty much if that relationship started with Mr. Clark or others before him, and what do you think about the legacy of that man and your efforts to pick up and fill some shoes there? And I know you've worked alongside him for a number of years, as have I. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I was aware of the park long before I joined. I knew Ray Clark from church, and I remember when shortly after the breaker was raised at Boiler House in 2014, that the two mine cars were placed up at the top of the park. And I talked to Ray about that. He happened to be at the park at the time, and I asked him about what his plans were for restoration. And at some point, those mine cars were taken over to Bill Landmesser's Penn State Mechanical Yard, and they sat there for quite a while. And in the interim, Ray had asked me about possibly restoring the C&J concrete switchman shanty, which was used as a shelter for a person that was responsible for switching the trains to the different tracks that they needed to be on. I took that project on, and I had help from my sons and also a local person that I knew from the church who was an aspiring woodworker. His name was Nick Davinsky. His father was the choir director at St. Leo's. I was a member of the choir, as was my wife and two of my sons, Joff and Mark. I played guitar and percussion. My son Mark was a drummer. My son Joff was a cantor. So we were all kind of involved in the history. My son Joffrey actually started to go to school to become a history teacher, but I guess that didn't pan out for him. So history's always been important to the whole family. As you mentioned before, my wife's grandfather was crushed to death by a mine car. He actually didn't die at the mines, he died at home. And there were lots of stories about massive injuries and so on and so forth. So I was always interested. Even when I was in grade school, we would be told to do different types of mining projects, and people brought in all types of mining memorabilia, and we made little models of mines. We always had trains, so we had coal cars that we could use to display. So the interest was there from a very young age, and I could still remember driving past the breaker when it was still operational and seeing the cuts of coal cars filled with the blue coal.
Cool. Yeah. Go ahead, Bobby.
Oh, well, we've also noticed that, in your efforts to, do the work in the yard, you've had a lot of help from a number of volunteers and just other historians, and just, I think, people that have a a liking for the history of the mining here in the region, particularly the anthracite. And your background in just your masonry and welding seems to have really, come to the forefront with a lot of the efforts over there. So, can you touch on just like the examples of some of the types of work that you've been able to do that was from your earlier trades that you picked up? Because I think that that's something that even some of the youth here in the region, if they're, as they're looking to go to school or they're looking to go to college or even just pick up trades, what the value in is of that effort of the that you took while you were at the Votech school and your work in masonry, that some examples of what you did over there that could show some, maybe some youth that are looking to get into those types of trades, what could be done and what you've done over there.
Well, for example, the Switchman shanty, which was made completely out of concrete, had a lot of structural damage, and that needed to be repaired, and that entailed making short sections of forms and patching in the broken part, working from bottom to top, moving the form up to the next level, and so on until you got to the top, and then it had to be smoothed out and try to match the existing finish as close as possible. And I did have quite a bit of help from my two sons and Nick Dubinsky, because all the framing, the window frames and the door frames, all had to be built from scratch. And I was really honored that Ray Clark thought enough of me to ask me to even get involved. And that also led to future picks as far as the CNJ mass signal, which Ray's nephew George Clark started working on in his spare time on weekends and after work, and his job took him away from that, so my wife and I took over and ended up painting it. And I had my former dentist Lisa Koch, her son Declan, he helped me. He cleaned all the hardware, the nuts and bolts and everything, because they were all rusted. So it's nice to be able to see that people are still interested, even young people. It's not people that grew up like that. There are young people that are actually interested in preserving and getting involved with preserving the history.
Speaking of young, pretty frequently, you want to tell us? Yeah.
Yep.
You want to tell us about your granddaughter?
I have quite a few pictures of her in the locomotive and various places around the park, and she's taken her own pictures. She loves it up there, and I try to explain to her everything that's going on. She was kind of reluctant to the slope because she wouldn't get close to it because she saw that it went underground. But as she gets older, she'll come around. But you can never get kids involved at too early an age. My grandson is 3 years old, and he was at our recent open house at the park this past October, and he enjoyed himself, although he's a little bit too young to understand what everything's about. But the sense of being part of the community and coming together is what's important at that age.
Yeah, I could tell you that like over the last, 20 plus years, I think, as Ray was, running the show over there, his stops into the office here were very frequent. And my staff and I, and we just did whatever he actually asked us to. You can't say no to the man. And he was a go-getter. He just wanted to get things done. He wanted to get the community involved, and he wanted to educate the youth that would come through the site, because he had stories to tell, and we wanted to be sure that we could let him tell those stories. And they were great. And the kids that have come through, they've come through since my daughter was in like the 4th grade. So when she was really young, I've coordinated some tours with the local high schools and elementary schools, but they started off in like 4th grade, and we would expose the kids to a number of the sites around the valley here, whether it was the Huber or it was the Avondale mine site, or it was any of the number of mine discharges in the local area here. When it came to doing anything at the park, Mr. Clark was there to like really get the kids engaged, and they loved hearing from him and hearing the stories. And some a little frightening, some a little like they couldn't imagine doing that kind of work. But nevertheless, it's something that needed to be told, and for them to see this particular structure before it was torn down in I think it was April of 2014, and it was the last breaker standing here in the Wyoming Valley. So that was something, a sad sight to see for everybody. But I think what you were doing and what many others have been doing with adding the different elements to the park, and we've had lots of students and youth participate in doing some of the rehab and refurbishment. And when we restored the Huber Breaker Colliery sign, I remember getting dozens of students from King's College through a service project, and they repainted that sign that's up there now. And so that's a lasting legacy that, he helped to raise above in the park, and managed to get some of the early things done. That it just sounds like you're picking up a lot of good stuff to move forward, that we've all talked about over those 20 years, and they're actually coming to fruition. So that's a testament to both you and other members of the society and volunteers that have really got it to where it is in that little 3 acres here in Ashley. And it's really coming a long way. And I encourage people to check out your website and the link that we put into the chat episode here for you to see what's going on with the Huber. But getting back to you, what are some of your kind of current hobbies, or I want to talk about a little about your modeling capabilities and your work on HO scale railroads and the cars that you've created, and how you decided to like mix in some of our iron oxide pigment, which is great for us because it's another way to create awareness to an entirely different audience in the railroad sort of realm. And your artistic ability to do those things is great. And you're obviously a railroad fan, as many of us are. So can you give us a little bit of background about that hobby and passion you have for doing that type of artistry?
Well, I want to jump back real quick to answer a few more questions about Ray Clark. He was dedicated first to God, to his family, to his church, and to his community. And he had the energy of a 12-year-old. I always admired his dedication, and he always seemed to be wherever he was needed, whether it be with the family business at Clark's Floral, or doing weed pulling at the park, or whatever else, volunteering at the church. I remember one project he was working on, the iron landing outside the side entrances at St. Leo's, and he had a little 4-inch grinder, and he was grinding some of the rust and paint off. And I felt so bad for him that I wasn't able to help, but I ran home real quick and I got a big 7-inch grinder so he could at least have a better chance at getting accomplished with the job. So he was a very major inspiration as far as my involvement with the Huber Breaker Preservation Society. And also I want to talk a little bit more about some of the welding skills that I learned when I was in the Air Force. That helped greatly when I worked on restoring the mine car. And I also had help from somebody that you know pretty well, Adam Zwolinski. He helped me when we first got the car delivered to the garage at St. Leo's. And we hoisted the mine car up from the bar joists because it had no wheels on it. It was just dropped off from a rollback. And then we attached legs to it to keep it suspended while the work was being done. And my son Mark helped with a lot of the welding and grinding. A lot of metal was bent and crooked, and that had to be straightened out. And then my son Donald, after the work that was much we could do inside, he used his truck and a trailer that we borrowed from the Hanover School District to take the mine car over to the park, and we took it down to the site where it would be had finished assembly done. And that was done by former member Matt Stegora, myself, Nick Dubinsky, and I believe my son Mark was there at the time. We assembled the bottom frame with the wheels and placed that on the track. And then Bobby Hess, with the permission of Ashley Burrow, used the forklift or the backhoe to place the the cart part on top of the wheels, and then the project was complete. So once again, I was honored that Ray considered me to do that project as well. And getting to my hobbies, as a kid, I loved to hike, ride bikes, did a lot of camping, exploring, a lot of the old mining remnants that were on the mountain just behind Kmart on the other side of 81, going up towards Pine Run Road. There was a old wooden sluice that we would always check out. Unfortunately, all that stuff is long gone. Other hobbies include guitar playing, singing, bass guitar, percussion. Two of my brothers were drummers, and my son Mark is a drummer. We were very involved with the St. Leo's Choir years ago. And my wife Teresa was also in the choir. I was always involved in model trains as a young kid because my father put trains around the tree every Christmas. So that just grew. My brother and I would make an HO layout down in the basement every year, and it would be a different one. When we had it all the way we wanted it, we would take it all apart, bring it upstairs and set it up, and then wait for the tree to be put on. So my interest in trains goes way back. As I said, they were all around. And then several years ago, I was involved in a train forum, and we were doing model train cars as a fundraiser to sell for all the members in our group. And in 2011, I believe, the car that we picked was a coal car. And we were dealing with a company out of Northumberland called Weaver Models that was, I think, the only manufacturer of O-gauge model trains left in the United States. And I was the obvious choice to be the representative to go down there because it's in Northumberland, a little over an hour away from here. So they lost their source for coal loads. The man that was making them from down in Nescahoning, I believe it was, had passed away. And I started experimenting with different ways to make coal loads. And it led to a little side business, and I was actually them for people all over the world at one point. So I have a couple examples of some of those loads that I used to make. This is a ore car that would have been iron ore, which was used all over, especially even here in Pennsylvania. And some of the dyes that I used to make these ore loads was taken from the pigments that Epcamer collects from the acid mine runoff here in the valley. So it's recycling on a completely different level. And then this is a blue coal car. This was a fantasy car that was made by Kane in the late 90s. And I made the blue coal load for this as well. And this is made from the actual dye that was used to dye the blue coal here at the Glen Alden Blue Coal Facility in Ashley. And I was given a coffee can full of that dye, and that'll probably last me for the rest of my life. And this is another type of coal load. This would just be regular black anthracite, which did also come out of here. Not all the coal that was made here, processed here in Ashley, was dyed blue. So this would have just been a standard coal load. And this would represent coal that was filled in the car from 3 separate chutes at one time. And that's why it would be piled up like that. And this is a CNJ car. And this would be one of the cars that would have been routinely filled here in Ashley. And this is made by the Atlas Model Railroad model company out of New Jersey, although this was probably made in China. As I mentioned before, the only company that actually made the model cars was Weaver Models. This is another Weaver model. This one's from Weaver, and this is a woodside gondola, and they used during the wars so that they could save on metal. So they would make the sides and anything else that they could. This represents a load that would have been from a train wreck where rails would have been destroyed, ties would have been damaged, and ballast, other dirt, and everything else that would have been mixed in with the cleanup process, been dumped into these gondola cars and then hauled away. And then the other cars would have been brought in with new rails and ties and other things. So that's about the extent of my hobbies.
Wow. Yeah. Can you, just for those of us that aren't from the anthracite, Eastern Pennsylvania, can you tell me a little bit more about why the coal was dyed blue?
I didn't. You're cut out. I didn't hear the whole question.
Why did they dye the coal blue? I've actually not heard about that.
It was basically for marketing, but it also helped out to keep dust down. Coal dust is very explosive and flammable. So in the days of steam locomotives with sparks and cinders coming out of the exhaust of the smokestack, there were actually incidents where coal cars would catch on fire. So when the dye was mixed with water, and I'm not sure if there was any other chemicals put in with it, it would actually coat the top of the coal and help to keep down the dust. So that's the reason. That's one of the reasons. Okay. And also the Reading Coal Company used to dye their coal red. And there were other companies that dyed it gold and orange.
Okay, so it could be a proprietary type, so the coal didn't get...
Right.
Yeah, there was lots of stories about why different coal companies would use different marketing ploys and tactics, so that if coal was being like even stolen off of coal cars or coal barges, and they were stopping off at the bar or something, on their way down the valley, that if somebody knew about it, there would be like barroom fights over, what are you taking the coal off of my car for? We know that that's blue coal. Or you could tell because of some of the marketing techniques that were used by some of the industry during that time. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, that makes sense. And I see you got a comment from John Welsh about possibly building a 2-scale railroad layout of the Huber complex. And so has that been done already, or would you be interested in doing that?
Oh, that's one of my goals. That CNJ black hopper that I showed was donated by a friend of mine who now lives in New Hampshire, I believe. He was originally from here in the valley, and he's a big railroad fan. And I told him that I wanted to collect all the different coal hoppers that service this facility and build a model of the Huber breaker and also the C&J shopyard. And I believe I have enough evidence in photographs, and there are actually blueprints that still exist from the breaker itself. So it's a large-scale undertaking, but it has been. There is a model railroad club down in Bethlehem called the Lehigh and Keystone Valley Model Railroad Club, and they're HO, and they made a scale model of the Huber breaker and also the power plant with the concrete stack, which is the only thing that's left visible of the old blue coal facility.
Okay.
And they're down on Linden Street in Bethlehem.
Okay. Very cool. That sounds pretty interesting. So that's, like a passion of yours is, the small model type trains and things on at the Huber breaker. Can you tell us a little bit about what projects are underway right now at the park, and also a little bit about what you have planned for the future?
Well, we have the number 9 Loki that served the Loomis Colliery down in Hanover Township just before you get to Nanacoke. It was just above the Sansui Highway. and it also worked at Wanamie. Then it was sold to a historical preservation site in New Jersey. From there, it went to Iowa, and from Iowa, it went to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And one of our former members, Matt Stegora, brought up the possibility of trying to bring it back to the valley, if not to Wanamie, where it spent its last years operating, at least to the park. And through the help of Representative Eddie Day Pashinsky, we applied for a LSA grant and were able to bring the engine back from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and place it on rails in the park. And a couple of years ago, we had a pavilion built. That was through another LSA grant to cover the Loki while it waits further restoration. The goal is to eventually get it to full operation under steam. And the ideal scenario would be to be able to run short excursions from one end of the park to the other at the lower end where it's flat. But I don't think I'll ever see that in my lifetime.
No. Oh, don't say never.
Hey, Don, one other thing I wanted to see if you could mention, because I don't know if it's still an active fundraiser for the society or not, but Ray and I started this paver park effort to get people who have an interest in, getting their family name maybe onto a paver. And you might not know this, but the pavers actually come from R.I. Lampus outside of Pittsburgh. It's a company that does pavers that are permeable, and they are made out of iron oxide that Bob Hedden from Hedden Environmental provided to their company, and they put the iron oxide pigment into the pavers. And so we put that together as a green kind of infrastructure project years ago here at the park, and people can get their logos, get their names up to a certain character limit. But maybe, Don, if you've continued that effort, because I know you've picked up some pavers here recently and continued what Ray and I used to collect from anybody and everybody who wanted to put their name, on the walkway going into the park where one of the memorials is located on the breaker. Is that still an active effort that is underway with the society?
Absolutely. In fact, I just installed, I can't remember, there was 8 or 9 more pavers this past summer that people ordered through social media and word of mouth and other ways of getting the word out. Yeah, it's definitely still an active fundraising project, and it's a good way to support the Breaker Society efforts.
Okay, good. Because I think that I used to call it Buy a Brick, and it was a paver effort. And I just quickly searched, and it sounds like it's still on the website. So I put a link in there if people want to follow up with you and order some pavers. So I hope they'll continue to do that to support the society's efforts.
Yeah, there was a bit of a lapse. The owner of the company had passed away, and his sons decided to keep the business going, but it was probably a good 6 to 8 months of a time lapse in between getting it going again. So we had a couple different orders in the interim, and we put them together so that I actually drove down to the place in Mechanicsburg to pick them up so we could save on shipping. And it's a little day trip for my wife and I.
Yeah, ironically, the gentleman that passed away I believe it was Al Skelly, and Al Skelly had worked as a partner in Skelly and Loy, and Skelly and Loy is one of our larger construction companies and organizations that works on abandoned mine reclamation projects and has done that for decades. So Al was a part of that initially, and then went to work with the paving company down there that made the pavers, and so. It's came sort of full circle, and we were sorry to hear about his passing, but it's good to see that effort to add different pavers into the park is still continuing. So that's a good thing. One of the things we want to mention here is, as Ann was talking about what might be underway right now, So what's happening really in the park these days or in a more immediate future? And, what do you see? Do you see any kind of chance of this park becoming a gateway maybe to future development on the backside of the breaker grounds where some other company has purchased the property of the former breaker property, and there's rail access and things. So can you update folks on what's happening there, or what are some of the things you have planned going forward?
Well, we had money left over from a grant from several years ago, and one of our plans to use that money was to put property, and we hired a contractor, Broderick Excavating, to do the grading around the fence area. And in the meantime, Carol Kite from Valley Distributing purchased the Blue Coal property, and through a grant that she applied for, she had a company put the fence all along the western border between the Blue Coal property and the park property. So that saved us a substantial amount of money. We had a bid from one fence company for about $39,000 to just install the fence. That didn't include grading. So we used some of that grant fund to pay for the grading, which ended up being kind of a waste of money because the company that put the fence in regraded and did the finish work and the fencing. So we had fencing that was donated from Earth Conservancy that became redundant because of this new fencing project that was also put in behind the Earth Conservancy office building. And that and other fencing that we had donated from the new Luzerne County Transportation Hub down on Penn Ave, we were able to put fencing on the border between the Earth Conservancy office and us, which also includes an emergency gate entrance to the park. So that was done by one of our members, Leo Cesaric, and myself this past summer. And I think we spent maybe a total of about $600 or $700 on the materials that we didn't have enough of for piping, for corner posts and things of that nature, ties and some paint, because we had a section of fence that was donated that was already black. So we wanted to go down to a point where it wouldn't be visible anymore and make sure that the fence matched up into that point. So after the fence was installed, then Leo and I painted as well to match. And we also had reconstruction of one of the concrete block planters up along Main Street that was falling down. That was completed this past year, but we're waiting to get some more soil to put in to add plants because it was nothing but a cesspool for weeds. And we spent several days just pulling the weeds out. So we want to put plants. So the more plants that you have, that less room there is for weeds to encroach. And then there was also a Boy Scout project to build a planter down on the middle level of the park, which is near where the Mass Signal, the T, and Mine Car are located. And that project was also completed this past summer. And it's a big improvement because it replaced a previous Boy Scout project that had fallen into disrepair and was overgrown with weeds and kind of falling apart. So it was a big improvement there. And the big event that took place this past summer, or actually it was postponed until the fall, was the opening of the Knife Slope, which was the place where the coal was brought out from underground and sent to processing. It was originally slated to be opened up in June, and when slope opening was exposed, it was determined that the air wasn't safe to go any further, so the opening was covered again, and it was reopened for good this past October, early in October. Still a lot more work needs to be done. There is all the overburden that was pulled out from the filling in that needs to be moved, and there is a big pile of fill that was put on top of the concrete portal that's going to be moved. I just spoke to John Broderick, who did the site work for our fencing a couple years ago, and he came to the site yesterday and looked, and he's putting together a bid to do that work for us. And then around the opening, because the slope was slushed in, it's filled about 53 feet in. Even if we wanted to have tours like the Brooks mine or the Lackawanna coal mine, we wouldn't be able to because of the fill. It would have to be excavated, and then there is a regulation by the state or the mining authority that anything past 60 feet you're required to have an emergency access exit. So that would be something we would have to do even if we did want to excavate any further. So it's just going to be an added showcase for the park for people to see what actually occurred. And we're planning on having a kiosk made to explain exactly what took place there, because once the cars were pulled out in a 4-car string, they were switched over to a rotary dump, and 4 cars would be completely turned upside down. The coal was dumped out, and then it was by conveyor to the breaker for processing.
Well, that could be a future. That could be a future a RIPA grant that AppCamera and WhipCamera are a part of. That probably helped to support the educational kiosk recently that you put out for the Loki, right? For the Wanami 9. Is that established and installed yet, or is that planned?
No, we're going to wait until the spring when we have warmer weather, because it involves having to pour concrete, and we don't want any structural damage. So the kiosk is complete. It's stored safely, and just awaiting better weather to put in, which will only take about a day or two.
Well, that could be a future grant application, for you guys to consider for when you open up the slope a little bit. But just know when you get down to about 98.4 feet, you're probably going to hit water.
Yeah, we're aware of that.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, that's oh, go ahead.
Chris Murley and I talked about that, about the water level, because there is what he called a kidney vein that is down below that links to a manway that is actually behind the office here. If I look outside the window, I could probably come close to seeing the location of that manway. But unfortunately, because of the water table, that's not accessible.
Yeah, we've measured that as a part of our mine pool mapping efforts, and we know that water is a part of what is the discharge to the South Wilkes-Barre boreholes. And so we've done the mapping here at AppCamera to show that there's a very large mine pool sitting beneath the valley here that does eventually discharge some mine water. But up in this location in Ashley, several miles away from the discharge, you're at the point at which the water is still a part of that particular discharge that flows out into Solomon's Creek in Hanover Township.
Yeah. What I'm learning from all this, I don't know a whole lot about the historical preservation of sites. And so I'm just learning here from you guys right now how complicated it is preserving the historical aspect at the same time you're doing environmental improvements and, just the intricacies involved there, keeping everything safe. And so we do have the question of what is the stability of the Huber breaker itself right now. And I'm wondering too, you've got a sketch behind you, a pencil drawing. Is
You cut out on the last part of your
that the
question.
Huber breaker itself? You of the Huber breaker?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe you can show us the tower and talk a little bit about the stability of the tower itself and what any plans for preservation there would look like.
Well, as everybody knows, the breaker was raised in 2014, and the boiler house was the final nail in the coffin as far as demolition. The only thing remaining are a couple supports that are closer to the Family Dollar further north from the site here, and the smokestack that was used for the boilers that produce steam and electricity for the breaker facility and facilities in Sugar Notch and as far as Wilkes-Barre as well. I recently learned that electricity was shipped from the plant down to facilities in Wilkes-Barre and Sugar Notch. So it was both a steam producing plant and electricity that provided it for the breaker itself. The stack is in fairly good shape. It was offered to us by the owner, Carol Kite from Valley Distributing, to be included as part of the park, but there is asbestos contamination in the mortar of the bricks that line the lower part of the stack, where the greatest amount of heat would have been entering the stack. So it would be lined with what are called fire brick, and the asbestos was in the mortar pile at the bottom of the stack. Wouldn't require a whole lot to remediate, but asbestos remediation is very expensive and we don't have the funds to do that. She also offered the stack to the borough if we didn't want it, but they declined as well. We would gladly take it if the remediation was done or if grant money became available for that. That would be a great addition to the park. And we also discussed with the engineer that was doing the cleanup at the property at the time from Quad 3. I asked about including with that, if we did decide to take it, the additional piece of property that goes to Colville Road, which was another access to the blue coal site. And that takes the vehicles directly down to the bottom level where the concrete roadway is, that was down between the area where the slope is and the actual breaker itself. And that concrete roadway still exists. And the engineer that I talked to said that she would be agreeable to that because it's really basically useless property, because they would have to access the property from another location further south if they were to do any improvements. And she doesn't have any plans at this time to improve the property because of the exorbitant cost to do the final cleanup for the contaminants that are still on site, which from what I understand are PCBs and asbestos, other unknown chemicals. There were also things that were dumped down in the open shaft. The shaft is still open to this day. The only protection is a fence that was erected by DEP several years ago after Pacello had left the site.
Okay.
Well, Don, like for now, what do you think? Just going forward as we try and wrap up here in a few minutes, what do you need most? What does the society need most that you have a call for at this time that we can help you, kind of get the word out as you're continuing with a lot of great efforts and a lot of great projects that, it just can't be a one-man show. You need support. You need some blood, some young blood, we hope. What's out there that you're looking for to continue your efforts?
Members, and a lot of young members that can do the hard work, the manual labor. I'm going to be 70 in a couple months, and I don't know how much time I have, how much strength I have left. I was just finished up at St. Leo's Church, and I'm still in pain. So we need a lot of young members. We need involvement from the community, which with this proposition that I put out for a community garden seems to be garnering some interest. We have a woman who is involved with the Penn State Extension, a master gardener that is going to attend our December meeting and see if we can bring this community garden project to fruition. But it's going to take involvement from the community because the members of the society aren't in a position to take on any more responsibility. So they would be responsible for day-to-day maintenance and upkeep of the garden and whatever else would be involved.
Well, that's
and
good.
The other
That's
thing
good
we
that you
need
get some help.
is money. And we try to come up with creative fundraising ideas. We just had the train show at St. Leo's in October, I was speaking to the owner of Ready Made Trains, RMT. His name is Walter Maddock. He also lives in New Jersey, and he came to the train show and he proposed a 3-bay CNJ coal car that we could sell as a fundraiser. And I would include a custom made as part of that fundraising project. And other fundraisers that I had proposed was a possibility of having a haunted trail next Halloween during the month of October. Somebody from the community suggested having a light trail, but we don't have the electric infrastructure at this particular time to do that, but that's something to consider as well. So community
Yep, community involvement, more members.
is very important.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I've been really impressed with all of the things you have planned and all of your hobbies and just the vision you have for all of this. But I guess we should have asked this before, but in all of this, who were some of your mentors here with the Huber Breaker Preservation Society?
You cut out again halfway through your question.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, who was a mentor? Like who was one of your mentors maybe growing up that kind of got you in this direction? Or
the only mentor I had was my father. I mean, he was one of the maintenance people at Pervin Dairy when I was growing up, and I was over there all the time. I would go out on the road with him when he went to different dairies in the area, and I would always watch whatever he did as far as remodeling our house. I was involved as much as possible. I would take it upon myself to grab those that he had and hammer and nails and build things. So he was my inspiration as far as guiding me toward the construction phase.
Well, here, as we wrap up here, maybe our one last question is like, what kind of vision do you see for maybe teaching of our anthracite coal mining history and preservation at the site, locally and or regionally? What do you see as you try and sum it up here as we begin to close up the episode?
Well, we're in the process of planning a multimedia, multi-purpose building a little further down from the Loki Pavilion. We have about $90,000 right now that will get us site prep and a foundation in for the building that we are proposing. And we want to have that as a museum and an education center, also meetings. And I would like to get schools involved in bringing them up here for tours, not just grade school, but high school and as college as well, especially college students that are involved in history and the environmental aspects as well.
Right. And lastly, do you have any words of wisdom to share with other groups who would be interested in doing some preservation, historical preservation?
Don't be discouraged. There are discouragements that come almost every day. Working with municipalities when you're dealing with grants, trying to get them to see your point of view and to get on board with applying for the grants and dealing with the stonewalling from different places and all the regulations that are involved. Just keep pushing forward. Do the best you can. If you can't find answers with one person, look for someplace else. There are different sources for grants, federal, state, local, and take every advantage that you can. If you can't find information from one person, go to the next person.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Don, thanks. And we really appreciate you taking the hour here over lunch here on a Friday as we come into the holiday season and for joining us today. We're thankful to have you as a friend and partner in Abandoned Mine Reclamation efforts. And we want you and other folks to, stay tuned every Friday for the first Friday of every month at 12 o'clock for a new episode of the Abandoned Mine Reclamation Chronicles. And we have some interesting guests lined up here as we close out the year and start looking into the new year. And we have to confirm our next speaker. We don't have it lined up yet, but we have several in mind. Either possibly Kelly Williams from the Clearfield County Conservation District, or Bernie McGurl out here at the Lackawanna River Conservation Association, and or Chuck Cravata. So we're going to see what their schedule is like here in the next week or so, and see who we can get for our January 5th noon lineup, and we'll stay tuned for that, and we'll post that to our YouTube and Facebook channels at this point. And I'll let you close it out here.
Yeah, and so the last thing is we still have.
I'd like to give a quick shout out to.
Go ahead, Don.
I want to quick shout out to Chris Murley and the Underground Miners for everything they did for opening up the number 5 slope, and also to Earth Conservancy, Terry Ostrowski, for donating the additional land that was needed to include the slope into the park.
Good.
We do still have advertising sponsorship opportunities remaining for our last episodes, and you can find that at the Epcamer store to get more details. And with that, thank you so much, Don, for chatting with us, and we'll see everybody January 5th at noon. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.